Hi, my name is Miles, and I am a pastor of a church in North San Diego County, California. And one of the things that I do as a pastor is talk about theology. That is, I talk about what Christians believe about God, why we believe it, and then oftentimes what the implications of those beliefs are for those of us that believe them. Today, let's talk about the biblical witness for the person and work of Jesus Christ. Christ is, of course, the central figure of all Christianity and the central focus of the Bible. From the first book of the Bible, the book of Genesis, to the last book of the Bible, the book of Revelation. From the earliest announcement of Jesus' coming to this world, his advent that we find in Genesis chapter 3, verse 15, to Jesus' final declaration, "Surely I am coming quickly," at the end of Revelation 22, the very last chapter of the Bible. Jesus is at the center of the Christian faith. There is no Christianity without Jesus. But who is Jesus? What does it mean that he is the Christ? What is the concept of the Logos, or this idea that Jesus is the Son of God, that he is Lord? What is that all about? These are all essential questions of theology, of Christology, and though I'd love to answer every single one of them, that just isn't really possible in a short video like this. However, I do want to look today at several things that we learn about Jesus from the scriptures. Specifically, a few things that we learn of Christ from the New Testament authors John and Paul. So we'll begin first with the Apostle John. John authored 5 books in the New Testament: the Gospel of John, 3 epistles of John, and the book of Revelation. Within these 5 books, we are given a beautiful picture of the one that we call the Christ. In the Gospel of John, Jesus is presented as the eternal creator. Mirroring the opening words of the Bible, John begins his gospel in the beginning. But whereas Genesis, the very first book of the Bible, starts "in the beginning, God," John begins his gospel with "in the beginning was the Word." John uses the Greek word logos, which is translated here word. He describes that the Logos is God, that the Logos was present before creation and active in the creative work. And then by verse 14 of John chapter 1, John connects the Logos with Jesus when he writes this: "And the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, and we beheld his glory as of the only begotten of the Father, full of grace and truth." Jesus is the manifestation of the Logos in time and space. He joins the nature of God together with the nature of man. Thus he is Son of God and Son of man, having the fullness of both natures. This seems to be a very far out concept and teaching, and in some ways it is, but for the fact that Jesus proves himself, as seen in the Gospels, to be both God and man. His humanity is on display in places like John chapter 4, when Jesus is presented as being tired and thirsty and hungry as he's at the well in Samaria, or when his emotion is on display through his zeal in the cleansing of the temple in John chapter 2, or his weeping at the tomb of Lazarus in John chapter 11. But his deity is seen throughout the gospel as well. He refers to himself as the I Am, connecting himself to God as God reveals himself to Moses in Exodus chapter 3. Jesus calls himself the Messiah in his interaction with the woman at the well. He declares his eternal nature when he says, "Before Abraham was, I am," in John chapter 8. And he performs miracles, changing water into wine, healing the official's son, healing the lame man at the pool of Bethesda, feeding the 5,000, walking on water, restoring sight to a blind man, and raising Lazarus from the dead. And of course, most notably, rising from the dead himself. In all of these ways and more, we see that Jesus is fully God and fully man in the Gospel of John. But we see the glory of Christ in many other places in the New Testament as well. But for the purpose of time, I want to look at only 2 additional places from the Apostle Paul where we see it. First, Paul, when exhorting humility and unity among the Christians in the ancient city of Philippi, Paul uses what appears to be an early Christological hymn in Philippians chapter 2. The Christ hymn gives us insight into the early belief about Jesus among Christians that lived within 30 years of the resurrection. This hymn reveals that Paul and the other early Christians believed Jesus to be the existent one as God before his incarnation and exalted once again to glory after his resurrection. This is not a later adoption by the church in theology hundreds of years after Jesus. This is what they believed very early on. They believed that Jesus set aside his position enthroned in heavenly glory only for a time as he sojourned here on earth to accomplish our salvation through the death of the cross. And in so doing, Jesus is once again exalted as both Lord and Christ. In addition to Paul's representation of Jesus in Philippians chapter 2, we also have Paul's words in Colossians chapter 1, where Paul writes in a very similar fashion to John in the prologue of the Gospel of John, Jesus is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn over all creation. For by him all things were created, that are in heaven, that are on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or dominions, principalities or powers. All things were created through him and for him, and he is before all things. And in him all things consist. And he is the head of the body, the church, who is the beginning, the firstborn from the dead, that in all things he may have preeminence. For it pleased the Father that in him, Jesus, all the fullness should dwell, and by him to reconcile all things to himself, by him whether things that are on the earth or things in heaven, having made peace through the blood of his cross. These passages only barely begin to scratch the surface of what the scriptures have to say about the true nature and work of Jesus. Jesus pre-existed creation. He was active in creating. He is fully God and was fully man. He came in humility with grace and truth to fulfill the law and the prophets, to accomplish all that was necessary for our salvation. And upon doing so, he ascended back to heaven, where he is enthroned in glory and will one day return to establish his eternal kingdom. This is Christ Jesus, as he is revealed in the scriptures. And there is no Christianity without Christ as he is revealed in the scriptures.